Welcome to the Old Ways for the New Age podcast, where we weave the threads of traditional living into the tapestry of modern day life. I'm Hannah Forrest, a herbalist and naturopath with a deep love for plants, seasons, and the quiet rituals that shape how we live and care for ourselves. This podcast is an invitation to slow down and reconnect with the wisdom of the natural world through herbal medicine, folklore, seasonal living, ritual, astrology, and simple earth-honoring practices that can be gently folded into everyday life. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in. I wish to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and record, the Wonjarabara people. I honour their enduring connection to the lands, waters, and communities, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode. I have almost no words for the beautiful experience that I had speaking with this week's guest, and I really think the only way to describe it is just really deeply honored. I'm so grateful that I got to speak with this guest, and I really truly believe that their work has helped to shape me into the human being that I am, into the adult that I am. I think in some ways, even though we're probably not that different in age, I feel like their music helped to raise me. And this week's guest is Leah Song. Leah is a musician, storyteller, cultural speaker, and community builder, best known as one half of the band Rising Appalachia alongside her sister Chloe Smith. She was raised in a musical family in Georgia, and Leah's work really weaves together folk traditions, mythology, place, activism, and a deep love of the living world. Through her music, writing, and teaching, she explores themes of belonging, resilience, community, and cultural remembrance, helping people to reconnect with the stories, songs, and traditions that root us to one another and the places we call home. And I think in this conversation, you really are going to get to see the full spectrum of Leah and the gifts that she has to offer the world. I truly could listen to her speak all day. She has such a beautiful way with words and such depth to every response. She's so thoughtful. And, we talk about all of these things. We talk about, protecting folk traditions. We talk about mythology. We talk about what it means to belong and have a sense of place and to bring place into your work and what that looks like. We talk about music as a form of activism, and we talk about how music truly can be medicine for communities, especially in the wake of tragedies like what they experienced with Hurricane Helene. We talk about her tour. She's got an upcoming tour that's going to be with Living Traditions Island. So if you have time, in the next, I think it's in August. Little Birdie told me there's still maybe 2 spots. When we were recording, there was still about 2 spots left. So if you want to go and tour around Ireland with Leah, which I think once you've heard this conversation, you will 100% want to do. If I could get there, I would be there. I'm going to be living with the most FOMO I've ever had in my life, which I never usually get. But if that's your jam and you have the time in August, I think there's a couple of tickets, so you can check it out on her website or on the Living Traditions Island website. And so I really I'm thankful, and I'm just very happy that you get to listen to our conversation. And I also really encourage you, if you've never listened to Rising Appalachia's music or Leah's music before, quite often it's really like a balm for the soul, and it's really, especially Starling Arrow's work is like, lullabies for adults and for children. It's really the kind of music that I think helps to reset us in this modern world, where, our nervous system could absolutely use a little bit of nourishment. And so I highly encourage you to go and check out her work. She has a new album coming out. It's called Trade My Troubles. And then she also has an full album that's already been released with her bandmate Duncan Wickle, and it's called My Hope Lies Down in the Mississippi. And I just, in love with the quiet, I have to say, after speaking with her in this episode and getting to hear about the My Hope Lies Down in the Mississippi album, I, of course, had to go and have a listen. And truly, the first song on the album, like, it gave me shivers. It's called Foreign Lander, and it just brought me chills in a really good way and kind of brought me to tears almost. And it's a very raw album. It was completely recorded without like the conventional equipment. I believe it was all done on tape, and there's no editing, and it's exactly the way I like my folk music. And so you can go and check that out. I'm going to put all of her links in the show notes as per usual. And just, I'm really grateful, as I said already. So I really hope you enjoy my conversation with Leah Song. And she is officially the first musician to come on the podcast. So without keeping you any longer, enjoy. Hey, Leah, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such a delight to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. I've just been such a fan of your music for so long. And, I mentioned just off air that I found you guys at Woodford Folk Festival many, many, many moons ago and have been just avid listener of your music ever since. So it's just really fantastic to be able to talk to you today and share your story with my listeners. And so to start, I would love you to share a bit about yourself and kind of how you became the person you've become. Like, how did your music come about, and maybe even how you found herbalism, because I know that's a part of your craft as well.
Yeah, and those two run really lovely parallels. And we loved Woodford Folk Festival too. So what a great memory. So I grew up with my beautiful sister, and we co-founded our band Rising Appalachia, and we grew up in a real deep traditional music playing family. We grew up in the urban South in Georgia, and our mom is a amazing, prolific fiddler, both Appalachian and Irish. And our dad is a blues guitar player. And so there was tons and tons of music in our lives. We grew up in the traditions of the South. And I spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about this because, we're second or third generation kind of lineage holders, which in North America is a really big deal. And in the old world of many parts of the world, that's just considered, barely even scratching the surface. But we grew up in a lot of traditional music in the American South that a lot of people, even from the U.S., have never heard of. Old time music, contra dance music, and kind of traditional Appalachian folklore. So that was a really big part of our upbringing. And we named our project Rising Appalachia because we wanted to take the foundations of the roots of our family's traditions and then also grow out of it, rise out of it, write our own music, study different musics from around the world, use music as a bridge builder and kind of as a cultural conversation piece. So we really kind of came to the whole musical project as a way of learning and studying and traveling and being a part of broader cultural keeping in a way. And that's been our true north for many, many, many years. But even as we were just starting picking up our instruments and learning our songs, because our family did it, we didn't start a band when we were kids. We just sort of looked at it as the thing our parents did. And we didn't pick it up until we were young adults. And when we picked up music, we were first just using it as a conversation piece, as a way to travel, as a way to barter for tickets to festivals and, and to go. We started playing sets at a lot of the local herbalism conferences in the Southeast because we really wanted to take classes, and we were young in our 20s and didn't have the income to be able to buy tickets, but we would be able to play a concert here or there at some of these amazing conferences and festivals, and we would get our tickets in. So it really started that way. And at one of those conferences, we met the legendary Rosemary Gladstar, who has just been a beacon of support and creativity for so many people all around the world. Who's the godmother of a lot of the uh, new Western herbalism. And she said,
Mm-hmm.
girls, I'm gonna take you under my wing, and I'm gonna teach you a little bit about how to structure a business deal, but also how to make sure that you take the right amounts of adaptogens. And, she kind of took us under her wing, both as a teacher of herbalism, but also helped us understand how to craft a career around these creative offerings. And for many years, we just played herbal medicine gatherings all over the country. And really, when our peers were playing in dive bars and cutting their teeth, at karaoke night, and we were getting these amazing, really unusual gigs where our job was to offer ballads and songs for all these incredible students and teachers of natural medicine and herbal wellness. And I think that it deeply, deeply shaped our whole entire path in ways
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, Rosemary wouldn't take credit for, but in ways that I think feels real apparent to us. We're still doing it because we were led in such a graceful way.
That is so beautiful to hear. And I do, I have heard you on a podcast before talk about how, your journey with music and your journey with the plants kind of rose up together. And I think that's really beautiful. And what a gift to have Rosemary kind of take you under her wing and help you in that way. Because, I mean, that's the dream of how many herbalists across the world.
I know, it was so special. It was
the
very, very
fairy,
special.
the fairy godmother of modern herbalism, for sure.
Yes. And she
Um,
takes on many herbalists, but there's not so many musicians that get to have a herbal fairy godmother, so we consider ourselves very lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I just really appreciate you sharing how that evolved for you. And I think what a unique experience, you're right, to be able to say that you grew your music whilst also in that setting, which is very different, you're right, to the way a lot of musicians grow their craft is to
Hmm.
be immersed in this herbal culture. And I think when you fall in love with herbalism and you begin to work it into your everyday life, I really truly think that you never go back.
I
I
think
think
you're so right.
it's a part of you forever, and you see the
Hmm.
world forever in a different through a different lens, I think.
Definitely. A beautiful kind of wider aperture.
Yes. And while we're talking about plants, I was going to save this for the end, but we're already talking about them. So
We got there quickly.
I'd love to know, are there any particular plants that have become companions or teachers for you throughout your life?
Well, I completely agree with you about, seeing the world differently once you've kind of walked the green path. And,
Mm.
I think that neither my sister or I have formally studied herbalism, but we've had this backdoor education since we began, sitting in so many circles with so many teachers and just absorbing so much knowledge. And I'm actually looking at my garden right now. I'm sitting on my tiny front porch in southern Appalachia, and I'm like staring out at this garden that I modeled around staying with another dear friend and herbalist, Kathleen Myers, who is another part of our southern Appalachian herbalism heritage. And we used to stay as a touring band in her home because she knew us from the herbalism conferences, and she would host our whole band, and we would just be again dosed in all this incredible amount of teas and adaptogens and tinctures for our livers and for our whole system. And so many steps of our path have been so formulated by the herbal medicine tradition. And so my garden is absolutely taken over right now by lemon balm.
Oh, yeah.
And we've had a lot of, I do think that the plants that you need really show up. Um, we also went through a lot of us. We went through a humongous storm here, which
Mm-hmm.
is a whole other podcast's worth of conversation. But, as the storm has been getting rebuilt, the land has been getting rebuilt, we're watching which plants are prolific. And so
Mm.
I have lemon balm in my garden in mass, and it's so soothing, and it's just such a gentle herb for the system. I have a wonderful plant that's very traditional here in southern Appalachia called sochan, which was a staple for the Cherokee diet and is an incredible kind of bitter green, and it's all over. It's kind of taken over. And I don't think any of us would be able to function without stinging nettle.
Of
It's our,
course.
it's around, it's our friend. It's thrown in every single tea. We all often accidentally run into it and we know it. So those are just like a few that I can see from right where I'm sitting. There's probably many, many others that are regulars in all of our systems, but I
Mm.
like to see the ones that start to arrive all around you.
Yes, I was just talking about this with Robin Rose Bennett, and I think, it's so true when they say that the plants really find you before you even know
Hmm.
that you need them.
Yeah,
They know, they anticipate what we're going to need, and they show up for us, and it's up to us to be slow and still enough to notice that they're
right,
there waiting for us or sending us
right.
messages.
I know. I love that. It's such a
It's
reciprocal relationship.
exactly. And that's been a huge focus on the podcast this year, is that relationship building with the world around us. And I actually would love to talk about how your work is very rooted in place, I feel. So whether, it's in Appalachia or New Orleans or Ireland, you always seem to have a very strong sense of relationship with the landscapes and the cultures that have shaped your music. And so I'd love to know, to you, what does it mean to belong to a place, and how has your
Yeah,
understanding of place evolved over the years?
yeah, yeah. Great, deep, important question again for those of us that are of the diasporic people who have found ourselves living maybe only one or two generations in a place that is not native to our ancestry and that is not native to our lineage, which is a complicated story of modern people.
Mm.
I do think place has found a very deep taproot in our work and Rising Appalachia's work and also in my personal identity. And you just nailed it. It's sort of Southern Appalachia, New Orleans, and Ireland. That is a huge amount of the meat of our musical influences and beyond and broader. But I think, I think I think I had what you would consider like the real typical sort of hero's journey or archetypally, however you would identify with that, where I grew up in the South, again, in a traditional music family, in a working class family. We didn't have a lot of excess resources. We had art and music and culture. We went to public city school systems. I didn't have a lot of the funding to put myself into university. And, as a young person, I just wanted to go as far away from the South as I could. I wanted to move anywhere else. I wanted to go to Paris or to New York or to San Francisco or, wherever I could that was far away. And
Mm.
I wanted to be global and worldly and I wanted to get out of the stereotypes of the South. And I did. I spent a lot of years traveling in my young adult life before Rising Appalachia formulated. I lived abroad for the majority of about 6 years, all over. I traveled across Europe. I lived in Latin America for many years. I spent some time in Hawaii and Canada, in the Caribbean islands. So a lot of time away. And what I found over and over and over and over again, everywhere I went, is that people would say, "Oh, okay, well, where are you from?"
Oh, yeah.
And I'd say, "Oh, I'm from America." And then there would be this really quick, like, "Oh, well, you're from, all they have there is just Hollywood, McDonald's, guns, uh, you know, The
Mm,
stereotypes of where I was from, both the country and then the region, were
mm,
so intact, and they're not wrong, they're not incorrect stereotypes. Those stereotypes are part of this country. So I started to really realize that the stereotypes within the place of my birth, within the region and the nation of my birth, had a lot of validity, but also that I had this very different, very unusual, unique foothold in the culture of the place that I grew up, that has an anchor of tradition. And that I, not only does it exist in the region, but that it exists in my bloodline. It exists in directly inside of my family line, in a maybe not an unbroken way, but in a, I think the lines of our traditions did have some severance, which people really have experienced in a lot of places around the world where there has been mass immigration, any kind of movement of the human story due to all of the myriads of reasons that humans move around. But we kept a pretty strong music and folklore tradition intact. And so I started to really want to hold just a little bit of those stories as a traveler, as a way of saying, well, here's a little olive branch from some of the culture that is less known about the place that I come from. I come from a place that is very domineering in the news, very, very domineering in politics and in aggression and in what we're seeing now in warfare, and sort of just a huge player on the stage of global geopolitics in ways that are incredibly, incredibly enormous, to say the
mm,
very, very least. And there's these underbellies. I think every empire has underbellies of culture keepers, of medicine people, of song tenders, of poets, of preachers. And those are the stories that are so often plowed over by empire. And it happens over and over and over again. Empire will plow over the stories of the people that it's trying to take over. And it also will internally completely wipe out culture and
mm,
cultural interactions and cultural engagements, because that is how empire stays empire. That's how it stays intact. And so it started occurring to me really young, like, oh, I don't need to go so far in order to still have a relationship with traditional culture. I was so hungry for it. I wanted to be a part of and a student of traditional culture. I realized, oh, actually, part of my work in the world might very well be to uncover and water and continue to feed parts of these traditions that are in my lineage, that are rearing their head up and kind of pulsing. And once you start digging into that relationship to place, it's just a wellspring, that you find
mm,
so many inroads to learn more about what bloodlines are in you, what the stories are on the land where you stand, which maybe aren't your bloodlines, but can also be part of your excavating and storytelling and studying. And place becomes just this immense encyclopedia of connection, purpose, learning, kind of untangling. And truly, it was not by design that we became immersed in place. It was by absolute captivation. We were just, oh, enamored. What a wellspring to start to make sense of who we are and where we are and what comes from those places. And I find that that is the case over and over and over again in people's stories, wherever they find themselves. It's a, it's such an immense way to orient yourself.
mm. Thank you for sharing that. And I love everything you just said, but there's a few things that stood out to me. And one is that very common shared story of people looking for meaning and like a place to belong outside of where they grew up. And I think that that is like a
Right.
very natural part of the way we're raised,
Right.
and probably the way that the overculture is raising us as well.
Right.
You know, there isn't, it's not glamorous to be at peace where you are, right? You know, and we're also
Right.
asserting our independence, right? You know, as young, you know, individuals, we want to find our own path and claim something for ourselves. And there's so many different facets of like the human experience that go into feeding that, but it is very common that we travel and we, you know, we move out of our hometowns, and like, you know, that's a drive, especially for creative people too, seeking that input, right? You know, that inspiration and, you know, new experiences, wanting to get outside of where we grew up to
Mm-hmm.
experience more. But it's also very remarkable that you recognized that there was this, as you said, wellspring where, right where you grew up so early, because sometimes that takes a lifetime for people to come back around and discover.
That's
So
true.
it's very, you know, very open-minded of you to be putting yourselves in a position where you are open to that possibility of exploring where you actually came from so
Yeah,
young.
yeah. I think it's kind of like it's not sexy
No.
to stay where you are or to like, it's really enticing to go wide and far. And it's an ancient human craving. I actually
Mm,
think from the dawn of time there has been a draw to like find out what's on the other side of the sea or study the stars or whatever. It's an ancient drive, but
mm,
I think especially in modern times, like it's a little bit more laborious to look inside or inward or and I think
mm,
that in a way makes me wonder if it's not even more important, but I don't necessarily want to pin them against each other. I think there's value in all different ways that we can kind of move towards the sacred and the divine, but I do think there's really deep gems in the finding out what it is that's inside of you and in the place that you come from.
mm. And I'd love to talk about, because you actually are doing a tour soon with Living Traditions in Ireland, and I love, you know, I would love to come to that, by the way. Actually,
Yes, you should come.
I love that this tour, or this, you know, experience that you're going to be a part of, is focused on connecting people with craftspeople, storytellers, songs, and folk traditions that are still alive today, and sharing
Mm,
that wisdom and knowledge with people, so that they can begin to reclaim some of these practices in their own lives. And so I would
hmm.
love to know from you, you know, why do you feel that these folk practices and traditions and stories and songs and skills are mattering so deeply to people in the modern world now? Because I think there is like this reclamation happening at the moment.
Yes. Yeah, and that paired really closely in my life to the herbalism. I kind of had one foot in the door of herbalism, one foot in the door of traditional craft, hands-on craft, basket weaving, pottery, welding. This was my understudy when I was in college. And then one hand in the traditional music. And I think that they all are par and parcel. They all feed the same part of our lives, which is, how to tactilely learn how to do things with your hands, how to identify what's growing around you, how to make something that's not just art for art's sake, which is something. Our father is also a visual artist, and he always says, you want to learn how to make things not just for the sake of beauty. That's also wonderful. But how special to learn also how to integrate craft into your daily life. And there's, I think, a tremendous hunger for this. And I had a huge hunger for this growing up, just because I think it actually suited my kind of neurodivergent brain. Like it wasn't necessarily a big, grandiose, conceptual thing. I just liked to do things with my hands, and it helped calm my mind down. But I think that there's something deeper to that. I think that all of our ancestors would gather both socially but also in task, and they would shuck the beans or prepare the grain or harvest or till soil or lift the barn, and there was this way where you were both social together and also involved in making and building and living interactively in each other's lives. And So many people can wax poetic, probably far more studied than I can, about what's happening with modernity and this, the fact that you can just push a button and whatever you need shows up on your doorstep, and you don't have to go anywhere, interact with anyone, or learn anything, or have an awkward conversation, or meet a stranger. You can just kind of exist in this somewhat, um, this perhaps somewhat toxically autonomous world,
Mm.
where loneliness is now such a big piece of the struggle of modern people's stories. And I think that these traditional ways of living are the antidote to that. I really think they're the antidote to it. And you don't necessarily have to be a basket weaver or want to know how to weave your own baskets to be able to benefit from sitting in a group and learning something about the reeds that grow nearby and the weave that might be put together. And then all of a sudden conversations are happening over these multiple days where you're learning with your hands and also learning about the people in the room. And so it's to tie it all the way back to the living traditions journey. It's an 11-day journey across Ireland. And what's very special to me about the Irish traditions is both my lineage to Ireland, but also that it's an unbroken tradition. So I think that it's really starting to benefit us modern people to look at the places in the world where there is still living tradition, and not perhaps over romanticize it, but
Mm.
to start leaning in and learning a bit more. You don't have to abandon your iPhone and your laptop and never drive a car again to lean into some of these older craftsmen and craftwomen's ways, and let that just sort of integrate into your daily life. And I'm all of this all of this folklore and all of these old ways, all they have done for me personally is given me more depth in my daily life. I still live a very full modern life, and I love parts of my modern freedoms and accesses. But I think that it has deepened from being a student of craft and being a student of tradition, being a student of the ballads and the old songs. It's given me more of a full full perspective on my existence, really.
Mm. And I only laughed while you were saying that because that is that antidote to like loneliness and separation has been a
Mm.
theme that I have now talked about in the past two podcasts that I've recorded has come
Wow.
up. And I think that, Robin Rose Bennett said almost the exact verbatim what you said with the antidote
Wow.
to loneliness. And I just think it's so interesting because that's a realization I also had, was that in regards to the relationship with plants in the natural world. And I think that, when we consider how there are so many people hungering, that's that word, like hungering for something more, something deeper, something more connected, and they don't even necessarily know what it is that they're looking for,
Mm.
but they're looking for something to give more meaning and some hope to their life, and
Mm.
that building relationship and understanding, I think, to bring it back to herbalism for a second, starting to build relationship with the plants in a more animistic way really feeds, like, you know that community sense, and to help somebody feel like they're not alone in the world, because actually we're
Hmm.
related to all plants, all rivers, all trees, and to know that we have that many kin and relations everywhere around us is
Hmm.
very comforting.
It's
um
comforting. It is.
yeah.
And it takes you out of the humanistic um, sort of rut.
Yeah.
You start to realize, oh, wow, so much is interconnected.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd actually love to. You mentioned myth, and I'd love to talk about your relationship with mythology, actually. What is that relationship like, and how has it played a role in your music and the way that you live
Mm.
your life?
Mm. Yeah. Um, I think that it pairs just right alongside all of these parts of the conversation. It's like this whole animistic world, really. They all they all tie in so many. interwoven ways. And, you know, I always front load, like, because I think a lot of times people feel like you kind of have to be diehard to get into herbalism, or you have to be diehard to get into folk music, or, you know, and I think actually that there's wonderful little gems of treasure in every one of these uh, ways of studying and ways of being, and mythology paired into my folklore studies. They pair very, very easily. I mean, I'm a student of, first and foremost, the ballad traditions and the ballads and boleros and the airs, and there's so many stories that are put into song.
Mm.
And most of the stories that are put into song are also often tied to pieces of old mythology, or there's a piece of knowledge or information that's tucked into the lyrics of a song or tucked into the line of a story. And that has begun to really perk my interest, really fascinate me, that you can find in an old myth or in an old song a line perhaps about a plant, or a line perhaps about what season it was when two distraught lovers had to flee, or what bird was calling in the background of this story. And those have all these literal mythical truths in them. They contain little pieces of knowledge and the way that knowledge was passed from family to family, from person to person, and also often the way knowledge was passed that was not supposed to be passed, the way women passed knowledge for safety, the way people passed knowledge that were fleeing from dangerous situations, from dangerous villages, towns, war. There was a lot of knowledge that was passed through the songs and through the stories and through the myths that were disguised as entertainment, but actually contained information about how to survive. And I think that's really what has drawn me even deeper in to the understanding of all these old traditional songs, is sometimes, and stories, again, I pair them as equals in folklore. And sometimes you read it as just this sort of Grimm's fairy tale of a princess who runs away with a frog. But you start to dig in and you realize, oh, there's really important information that was passed from here. And this story actually locks in even earlier to perhaps a ritual that was tied to when the sun would set on the brightest day of the year, on the solstice, what plants were planted. And you start to put together this really intricate, really wild puzzle of how survival and knowledge were passed from generation to generation.
Yeah, that's really beautifully said. It really is. It kind of feeds back into that, rediscovery of our lineage, right? Being able to trace
Mm-hmm.
back what our ancestors were wanting to share through these lyrics and these stories. And
Mm-hmm.
storytelling is obviously such a crucial part of being able to reclaim that as well. I know storytelling is having its moment again now too, just like with verbal storytelling within communities. I know that people are wanting to bring that back as a tradition, which I think is fantastic and something we should
Mm-hmm.
definitely support. You speak and you sing about social justice too, and environmental stewardship and community, and you guys, I'm just going to say that I feel like there's a lot of activism in your work. And so I'd love to know from you how you feel creativity and art play a role in activism and maybe the political landscape we have going on at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Um, you know, in our origin, I would say there were sort of multiple pillars that really brought us into the understanding of our role as artists and into the arts and into performance. One, we've talked about several of them: our family lines, the gift of being brought in through the traditional medicine keepers, and then there was also this knowledge as young eager, heartbroken teenagers, young adults watching the world kind of crumble around us, which now it feels like it's crumbling at a much faster and perhaps
Yeah.
more dire rate. So that hasn't changed, but there was an understanding that, we could sit and join the ranks of protesters, and we could yell and holler and fight and shout, and that there was a role and a place for that. And we did that, and we spent plenty of time on the front lines. But we also realized that what happens in the role of the arts is that you actually are participating in trying to bring people together sometimes under the same cause, or sometimes just simply bringing people together who may not even agree, and letting people be in the same room and experience their humanity together and start to realize how much they may very well have in common. And I think we are seeing over and over and over again how divisive our media is, and how divisive our governments are. And the divide and conquer, it's as old as time. You pull people apart and get them all pitched against each other, and that becomes a much easier people to dominate. And you rally people and you gather them together and you bring them into the fabrics of all interacting and engaging collectively, and they're a much, much stronger people. And so I think very early on, in a very direct way, we were like, we want to make sense out of how to create music that is driven by questions, actually, driven by an asking of our audience, because there's always so many different perspectives on what is needed in a community and how to show up well. And so a lot of our music doesn't necessarily scream the answers, because we never felt that that was a true role for us to say, oh, we have all the answers. Here's what we should do. Here's how we should join. Here's how we should rally. But a little more of, please, everyone, come closer together and ask questions of each other, ask questions of the community, ask questions of yourself, and figure out how to navigate this absolutely distraught world that we're all trying to navigate. Figure out how to do that by leaning in to each other a little bit more. And I think that that was a driver originally, and that has circled back around to be a driver again, to say, all of the entities around us have everybody up in arms and disoriented and exhausted and sorrowful, and it just feels dismal to look at the state of the world. And that is the hardest place to find motivation to act from. It is the hardest place to feel a call to step up and take care of other people around you, is if you feel despair, disconnection, just an inability to act. And I think, once again, in a way that is not necessarily even a direct call to action, but in this indirect way, I think we still very much believe in the power of the arts to simply put us all in the same space together, to sprinkle in a sense of possibility into our lives, into each of our lives, so that there is more motivation to figure out how to keep moving forward and building solutions and leaning on each other and asking those questions. And we do not have all the answers by any means. And it feels absolutely like it's spinning out of control, even more than it has ever felt. But I still deeply believe in the power of art. And I believe, even if the whole ship is going to sink, I'm going to go down dancing. And I want to figure out ways to continue to spend my life force bringing that into the conversations and bringing it into the picture and bringing it into the communities, in hopes that it continues to feed our sense of possibility.
And something that I've appreciated so much about your work is that, I really enjoy my music to have a message, other than, not that I have anything against love songs, but I do find myself really looking for musicians and artists that create work about more than just romantic love. For starters, there's so many different kinds of love one can experience, but I have really enjoyed it. I find your music does inspire me and make me want to take action in my community. And community is a word you've used a few times now, and you also touched on Hurricane Helene, which was absolutely devastating, I know, for your community. And I'd love to touch on how you felt song, ceremony, and maybe collective gathering played in healing, and especially during that very uncertain, very difficult time for your
Yeah.
area.
Yeah. Well, for starters, I will say that we do also write some pretty mean love songs. Just gonna
You write
say.
all sorts of beautiful music.
We we
Nothing against
toss
love
some
songs, I promise.
we toss some meaty love songs into our writing, and it's pretty, we have fun with it. But that's neither here nor there. I was just smiling when you said that, because we call my sister is like the fountain of love songs. She writes such good ones. And heartbreakers also. But yeah, gosh, so the hurricane is a whole podcast's worth of, it's a novel. It's probably the rest of second half of my lifetime's worth of understanding and unraveling. And it's such a complex and compounded storyline for both my sister and I. We grew up in Georgia. I'm just going to give you a little backstory because it's important. We grew up in Georgia, and like I said, we spent some time traveling in our early 20s, and then Hurricane Katrina struck very close to our home in New Orleans. So that's only two states over. And our dear friends and artistic community in New Orleans were all very deeply impacted. People that we knew and loved, and people that we grew to know and love even more. And we traveled first we worked around storm recovery in Georgia, and then we traveled to New Orleans, and ended up spending about 7 years living there post Katrina, and deeply involved in all of the rebuild, cultural rebuilding, structural rebuilding, spiritual rebuilding, just immersed ourselves into bearing witness to and supporting the rebuild of what I think is one of the most incredible cities in the world. New Orleans is like none other. And the way that art was part of the recovery post-Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans was also a big part of our understanding of the power of art. So fast forward literally 20 years later, and we're living in a small town in southern Appalachia. We decided to come to the mountains of the Appalachian South, also to study the music and traditions, to immerse in the traditions of our family line. We have a long tie to Appalachian folklore. So we came up here, and secondarily because it was considered one of the safest places to live. And so that's not why we came. We came for familial and cultural reasons, but it's just an interesting side note. And so the notion of a hurricane coming through southern Appalachia is like basically never happened in the history of almost ever. It's a very, very rare thing. New Orleans, Florida, the Gulf Coast, they're aware of hurricanes. They are prepared for hurricanes. They come every year, not to the level of disaster and catastrophic amounts as Katrina, but it's a hurricane place. We moved to a small mountain town. It doesn't get hurricanes. And so when there was warnings that there was going to be a big storm, we actually both sort of snickered and said, well, there's always warnings. And I do truly believe that the media is also part of this chaos machine to just make everyone scared of everything. Every thunderstorm, every rainstorm, every windstorm, every snowstorm is the worst of the worst of the worst. And so nobody really thought anything of it.
Mm.
Truly, no one really probably should have. The amount of warnings that you get on a daily basis about something catastrophic, it will numb you out. But then, as we now all know, and those of us here really understand, it was, what is considered a 1,000-year storm, and it was devastating in a way that doesn't still makes no sense. The hurricane in and of itself was not that catastrophic, but it came with very high-speed winds that took about 100,000 trees down in the area.
Mm.
And it came with breached dams and excess water, which created flooding that has never happened ever to the level that we saw here. And so all of a sudden in our, in this next chapter of our lives, we found ourselves not the people who came to build art or to rescue or to support or to help a frontline activism, but the people absolutely gutted and devastated and terrified and destroyed and disoriented from a storm that my sister and I couldn't find each other for over 24 hours. There was no running water for upwards of 3 weeks. There was no electricity. There was no cell phone service. There was no news. We were listening to news on battery operated radios. The gas stations were closed. There was no running water. That was actually the scariest part.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many silver linings and so many stories of how this community rallied to take care of each other, and how people who never had met each other dug each other's homes out of the mud and built bridges out of chicken wire and scrap wood to get people out of their homes, and delivered water from rain catchment systems. I mean, there's just story after story after story of tremendous recovery and tremendous resilience. And our story has a whole different lens, having been on the side of hurricane disaster rebuilding, and then in the same period of our lives being on the side of the recipients of the disaster. And so, in a strange way, I feel like we were better equipped than we would have ever thought would have been necessary to understand how to start to make sense of rebuilding. And we credit our time in New Orleans for these life lessons that actually became life-saving lessons in our lives. There's a concept called wayfinding, sign making, where so many street signs washed away, and that you would paint the signs so that emergency vehicles would be able to locate people. And we set up a station where we were painting signs, street signs, and going back through the neighborhoods to nail street signs up where the signs had washed away. Again, the spirit of music and art, people were building makeshift supply distribution centers in parking lots all across this part of Appalachia. And folks are coming, they have no electricity, they're coming to get diapers, baby food, gallons of water, a blade for a chainsaw, those they can cut a tree off of the back bedroom of a house, basic emergency supplies. And the ability to also sit in those spaces and offer music and just sit and play. We just sat around and played folk music, Appalachian fiddle and banjo tunes, and that doesn't it's not a first responder need. What I consider is a second responder responder need. The first response is there, delivering supplies, and the second response is the art and the artists who are also in the same melting pot in these spaces, and being able to sit and play music and sing songs and see that it brought just once again that little tiny space of like respite and ease after days and weeks of absolutely dire circumstances gave a whole new understanding to us of our own relationship to our own music, and how much it also helped us make sense of what we were doing, and how we were going to pull ourselves out of that situation. And
Mm.
it's something I'm going to probably spend the rest of my life trying to fully metabolize and articulate and understand. And it made our name is Rising Appalachia, and
Mm.
sitting at the edge of floodwaters that went 23 feet past their banks in Appalachia and playing these old songs, just gave a whole spine shivering new understanding of what we were doing, and what we were here to do.
Yeah, it's a very powerful story you shared. And the mountain town where I live is very small, also. And it ended up experiencing a tornado and a cyclone within 18
Mm.
months of each other,
Wow.
with no warning. There was no warning. One of them happened on Christmas Day.
Mm.
And we were away. We went away for a holiday. And we started seeing these messages come through from people, but it was like barely anything. And we tried to call the person who was staying in our house taking care of our cat, and we couldn't get onto him. And it's a long story also, but seeing how community comes together in a time like that, where also sometimes the systems that are in place to help people can't deliver even as quickly as the people can when it comes to
Right.
first responding, and like seeing
Right.
where there's gaps there too, but where the
Right.
community absolutely is, supportive and comes together like you've never seen, right?
Like you've
and
never seen.
and it really it inspires faith in humanity again when you see people who've never spoken to each other, neighbors who've never didn't know each other come together, and musicians and herbalists. And it's often the people who are creatives or people who are in positions of service, working with the people, that are the ones that come forward and want to help. And I think I can see how, because we were without water and like any toilets or septic for 2 weeks. So
Yeah.
it's it's actually kind of mind blowing to try to wrap your mind around what that looks like for an entire community of people,
Right. Right.
for that long. It's you can't even fathom how we make it work.
Right.
But I can. There were clinics set up on the mountain where people were offering body work and like acute herbal support, and I can totally see, like, along the lines of what you're saying with your music, how it gives that respite, and that when somebody has no home and they've got a tree through their house and they're covered in mud and they've got no shower or a toilet or water to
Mm.
drink, and to have that moment of human connection with somebody who has compassion and is in the same situation you're in, but creating that moment of beauty for them, how valuable that would be
Yeah.
and is for so many
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. And
Um,
how often it is a bigger offering of wellness than you can articulate at that moment, because
mhm.
it's also softening a trauma response. And in trauma is where there's also a lot more, there can be more panic. And so you're trying to everyone's trying to help each other settle down so that we can each take better care of each other. And it's amazing to see what happens when, I wish that upon no one. Your
Mm.
circumstances and our circumstances here, it's, you hope that we have those lessons without absolutely dire, life-threatening circumstances. But when you see that and you see everyone come together, it does give you faith again to say, oh, okay, like maybe we do stand a chance as humans
Yeah.
out here in this crazy world, because people really, really step up to take care of one another in ways that
Hmm.
I've is incredible to witness.
Mm. And this is the beauty of how we are all wanting to build community again, and how there is such a push for that at the moment, and such a need for that, for communities coming back together and everybody offering their unique gifts within those communities, because I really do believe it's the way, that we're going to offer a better future for ourselves.
Right.
And so, to change pace a little bit, I would like to talk about your music. And I also wonder if some of your music that is upcoming was influenced by your experiences. But I'd love to talk about your upcoming album. I think it's called Trade Your Troubles. And you also have a new single, In Love with the Quiet. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. We're so excited about this new album. It's called Trade My Troubles.
Oh,
And
sorry.
no, that's okay. It's actually a conversation that we've had ourselves, because so often our music is in service, and hopefully it's always in service. But this album coming feels like it is really a personal body of work, and so much of our own stories and our own hurdles were jumped through in the long arc of this album, that we decided that we wanted its title to also reflect that it was, you know, it's almost more of an introverted album. And the first song is In Love with the Quiet, which is just the right way to introduce it to the world. To say, it's been some years and we've been quietly pouring ourselves into this music. And most of that album was pinned to be finished the December after the storm. Um,
Mm.
and obviously, our lives were entirely rearranged for a matter of the majority of the following, 8 or 9 months, and arguably the following year as well after
Hmm.
the storm. And so the album was really put on the back burner. We did a lot of storm recovery work. We did a lot of rebuilding. And then we also needed to take a breather and step away. So it's, it's a body of work that has straddled a natural disaster and my sister becoming a mother of almost a mother of two now. Those songs began before she had had her first child, and the album will release after she has had her second child. So there's motherhood, there's motherland, which I like to talk about also, because within this body of work is also a very deep relationship that I have begun to nurture to my and our ancestry in Ireland. So there's
Mm.
motherhood and motherland and ancestry. There's natural disaster and the recovery post-storm. And then there's just our lives and the churning way that art and poetry supports the making sense of a life and the interaction of that life. So it's full, it's just full and full and full and full, and also of the times and the way that the world around us is impacting our ability to move and our thoughts, our ability to love, and our way to understand how to be neighbors and be in community. So it is full of all of those things, and hopefully still delivers some of the traditional components, some of the activism components, some of the introspective, questions of how to live well, and how to live a whole life. And it's been so many years in the making. It just feels so exciting to finally be bringing it out into the world and for everyone to listen to. And new music and songwriting is, it's like you release it and then you just have to let it go and let it go out into the world and live in everyone's lives however it needs to. What the songs mean to us will not be what they mean to all of the listeners.
Mm.
And it will have a life that we cannot even predict, but we're so proud of it. And it feels so wonderful to still have a relationship to the muses. We didn't crank this album out fast. We didn't make it so that we could get back on the road and start touring. We weren't cornered into it. This album took its time, and the songs took their time, and it's reached its place of maturation exactly in the way that we have wanted it to and needed it to. And now it's here. It's really ready. So it's In Love with the Quiet is the first single, and we'll release a single a month, and then the entire album and a documentary film and a new merch line and a tour will all come out into the world in October. So
it's interesting I saw when you shared about the new album and had mentioned it was a few years since the last one. I kind of had to check the dates because to me it kind of felt like your last album was a few
like
weeks
a couple
ago.
years ago. I know. Totally.
And
Totally.
I still listen to it all the time. And but I'm so very excited to hear the full album, and I absolutely adore In Love with the Quiet. I've had it on quite a few times. It's only been out for a few days, but
Yeah.
you know, I feel like your music is very much like a balm for my soul and my nervous system, especially in this crazy world. So it's something that I love to listen to with my son, and I love to put on in the car and, just have on in the background while I'm doing my life. And so I'm very much looking forward to having more of that to introduce into my daily rhythms.
Yay.
And you also have your own music project happening. And so would you like to share a bit about that?
I would love to. Thank you for asking. It's been a very long and slow and almost nerve-wracking process for me to bring some of this music to life that is under my name and the Leah Song Project, or just Leah Song. And I've spent most of my adult life really pouring my creative soul into Rising Appalachia, and I love to be a part of the body of work and the community that is Rising Appalachia. But there's been something really special about beginning to turn the lens inward a little bit and honing in on my own individual creative voice. It's been very liberating, and it's been very slow process. I'm such a lover of the collective. I have really resisted wanting to be I or me in the creative world. But I find that what it's really bringing me is a sense of even more creative wellspring, again, like we've talked about a lot across this podcast. And so I've been developing and slowly releasing some music that I've worked on over the years, some original songs and some traditional songs that I've coveted and loved. And I've released a few singles. And then last month, my bandmate and I, Duncan Wickel, who is a big part of Rising Appalachia as well, we've considered each other accountability buddies in our creative process.
I love
and
that.
It's great. I highly recommend get an accountability buddy. And I think we both have really struggled with, getting solo workout. It can feel self-indulgent, actually. And there's something so gratifying about being part of a team and part of a collective. And so as accountability buddies, we had a creative arts retreat down in New Orleans, and we went down there for a couple of shows. We play often as a duet, and he brought all of his recording equipment down and said, let's just see what happens. If we get a song or two out of it, that'd be great. And neither one of us put any pressure on ourselves or on each other. We set up a single microphone, and we set up cassette tapes. So both of us are very analog. We love analog recordings, especially in the era of AI. There's something so powerful about hearing the room and hearing the breathing. You can't fix or change a thing in analog. And ended up recording an entire collection of songs that we both love, re-envisioned old folk songs, and we did a couple of takes of each song and just said, let's see what we get. And we liked it so much. We liked every single piece of it so much. It's not perfect. It's not flawless. And that to me is part of the magic. You can hear creaks in the room where we're recording. You can sometimes hear the train pass in the background. We're at in an old shotgun house in New Orleans. And it felt so raw and so rough around the edges. And for both of us, that felt like perfect. It felt like a perfection that was in its imperfection.
Mm-hmm.
And so we released it. We released it as an entire body of work, all analog, no frills, no release schedule, no dropping of singles, no stay tuned for the pre-link, kind of the opposite
Mm-hmm.
of what the music industry is doing and what Rising Appalachia is doing with this album. We just did the opposite. We said, this feels so good to be able to make and to have living and in the room. And so it's a complete moment in time captured and out in its fullness. And it's called My Hope Lies Down in the Mississippi, in honor of the Mississippi River. And it was all recorded live and all analog in New Orleans. So that's been a project that was just a special treat for both of us. And I love it just as equally and proudly as any. And that was a great learning curve for me to be able to do that creatively.
It sounds incredible, and I only came across it when I was researching for this podcast episode with you. And I know that that's the first thing I'll be doing when we get off this chat is going to find that
Yeah.
music and gifting it to myself today. But you took the words right out
Yay.
of my mouth. Something I love so much about your music is that you definitely, even with Rising Appalachia songs, and you're also a part of Starling Arrow as well, which is
Yes.
another creative project.
So much art.
Is that your music does have a certain rawness to it, which I really appreciate. I find that that's the kind of music I enjoy the most, and so to hear that you did this one analog is very exciting. And I think that again, in a time where we're so busy and fast paced, and trying to find ways to bring a bit of peace and ease and just pleasure back into our everyday, that this is
Right.
going to be a really wonderful way to do that.
Yeah.
So thank you for creating
Yeah.
that work.
My
And
pleasure.
if people wanted to find, let's say, upcoming merch, or even just, I really enjoy your shares on Instagram, how can people best engage with your work and find you?
Great question. We're all sort of semi-Luddites, and nobody in our whole camp is really good at any of the socials, but we're all there. Rising Appalachia, you can find our webpage and our newsletter. I sometimes find the newsletter can get you a little bit more of an inside scoop, but we're on all of the socials, Instagram and Facebook, YouTube. We've got a bunch of live videos coming out, and that's just search Rising Appalachia anywhere. And I am still pretty engaged on the Leah Song platforms, also at YouTube and Instagram. And the music is under Leah Song for my solo project, and duo project, and all of the other projects that are in there. They have all these different myriads of shapes and faces and sizes. So it's not that hard to find, but I do encourage listeners to do a little digging and kind of find the platform that works the best for you. Sometimes if you just do a quick search, you might find like a fan page that isn't exactly our voice. So, find the actual Rising Appalachia pages, the actual Leah Song pages. Follow us on all the ways that you follow things. And that's the word of mouth and kind of sharing amongst the community is still tried and true, the very best way for any of these projects to live and breathe and be shared. We still answer as many of our messages and emails as we possibly can, and the team that works for us keeps us well informed. So we try and stay as connected as we can. And, you know, you sharing the music and your community sharing the music and the stories is worth a million posts. You know, it's the best way to do things is to play it in your kitchen and play it in your herb class and tie it into your kids' dance studios and all the rest. So we want this music to be out and in the world and considered our public service work. So find it and make it yours.
I'd love to finish this conversation with one question. And that's, at the heart of your work, there's a deep thread of remembering and remembrance and connection. So if there was one thing that you hope that our listeners were to remember about themselves, each other, or their relationship with the earth, what would that be?
Great question. I feel like we've sort of stirred at that answer maybe like at least a dozen or two times. You know, little pieces of what I would love people to take away. But, I think that maybe I would say lean in and listen to what your own innate story is. I think there's so much soft power in learning about who we are and what we contain in our own story, and not shaming it, not denying it, and not guarding it away from the parts that are perhaps hard or tricky in our stories and our culture and our ancestry, but using that as a tool to make our forward moving steps more attuned and more graceful. And so I think listening is really what I would advocate for, listening to one another and listening to our own stories and learning from those places.
Thank you so much, Leah. And thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure to have you and to talk about your life and your experiences and folk traditions and your music. And I really just am looking forward to seeing where you head next with your creativity and what you're putting out into the world. So thank you.
Thank you. What an absolute pleasure to spend my evening and your morning with you.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Your support means the world to me, and if you have a free moment and would like to leave a review, a comment, or a rating on your platform of choice, that would go a long way towards helping me to grow the podcast and reach more people. If you aren't already subscribed, check out my Substack newsletter. Over there, I share lots of free resources, as well as an option to join as a paid subscriber, which is another beautiful way you can support my work. May what you've heard today guide you in living a little more slowly and a little more connected.